One thing that I think you should learn and take away from Barney Kessel is the way that he's mixing swing ideas and bebop ideas. I think that really works extremely well in the way that he does that, and he's also really good at having some sort of catchy, refreshing swing ideas and also some more sort of intellectual and dense bebop lines. And in this video I'm going to go over some examples from his solo on Satin Doll, which he recorded in a trio with Ray Brown and Shelly Manne. It's on the album called The Pole Winners. And this is really Barney Kessel in top form. I can say that because also Barney Kessel is not always my favorite guitar player. I'll talk about that later in the video as well. But in this album, I think he's really playing well, and I think it's well worth checking out, and you can learn a lot from checking out how he constructs his lines and the devices that he's using. My name is Larsen. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and use that to make music, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. This first example, I think, clearly illustrates how Barney Kessel is relying a lot more on swing influences than bebop influences sometimes. Because in this example, this is in the first A, and it's on the chromatic 2/5, so we have E minor to A7, E flat minor to A flat 7, and the melody is simpler than what you would expect from a bebop line, because really what he's doing is that he's playing major pentatonic on the A7 and major pentatonic on the A flat 7, and then kind of ignoring the 2 chord. And what drives the melody is the repetition, and also he's using a lot of repeated notes, also something that's not that common with a bebop line. And he's also working with making the melody interesting by adding some phrasing to the repeated notes. And in this case he's sliding into them. He uses slides really a lot. So, and then essentially the same phrase on the A flat 7. So in that way, this is not really a phrase that's sort of weaving an 8th note line through the changes. It's just a melodic riff statement that is then moved to the next chord. When it comes to the jazz guitarist around this time, so in the late 50s, then it's almost like you have 2 camps, because you do have the people who are mixing swing and bebop, and that would be people like Barney Kessel and also Kenny Burrell that I just made a video on a few weeks ago. But you also have another camp which is much more really focusing on the lines and really maybe a little bit more intellectual, and that would be somebody like Tal Farlow or Jimmy Rainey. I'm curious if you see this the same way that I do, so leave a comment on this video if you have something to add to that discussion. Another part of Barney Kessel's playing that I think is really great is how he's really good at using the guitar both as a single note instrument like a horn and playing lines there, but he's also always making use of how the guitar is also a polyphonic instrument, and you can have several layers and you can play chords and intervals. And one example of this is this example where we kind of have him, he's kind of playing like a big band but then just with a guitar. So we get the first layer that's just this melody, and then he's adding another layer that's kind of comping that top note melody or making it a response to the call of the first melody, and that's this riff. So here it's clearly sort of a chord function. It's not really a melody in that way, but he does reinterpret the chords a bit to make it more interesting. The way he does that is, in this place in the song we have of course A minor to D7, and then that's repeated. And he plays A minor first and then D7, but then instead of going back to A minor, he goes down to this chord, which is essentially an F major with A in the bass, and then back up to the D7. And in that way, he's just creating a little bit more movement. The next part of the song is essentially the same, just up a whole step. And he also pretty much treats that the same, so we get again a pickup and a high melody as a sort of call. And then he adds the accompaniment up a whole step and plays pretty much exactly the same, just adding a few bass notes. So as you can see, it is already a part of jazz that you interpret the harmony. So you're not only improvising on top of the harmony, you're also changing the harmony to fit with whatever kind of color or sound that you want to add to it. And here you can hear Barney Kessel using it as a as a big band effect. I think this is quite clearly sort of the sound of different sections in a big band. And of course, Barney Kessel was also a guitar player in a lot of big band projects. He's the guitar player on a lot of the Ella Fitzgerald songbook recordings. He's done a lot of other stuff as well, so that's also a part of where he's coming from. Before I move on to the more bebop inspired examples, then I have this example, which is in many ways it's very simple because it's just a repeated minor triad, and then it's moved down chromatically. We are again in the chromatic 2/5, E minor A7 to E flat minor A flat 7. This works extremely well. Of course, here in this case it's a repeated pattern that is just moved down chromatically and then turned into a blues phrase, and that's how Barney Kessel is treating it in this solo. But it is also the kind of thing where if you listen to your own playing and you never hear repeated phrases like this, then maybe you want to ask yourself if that's really what you want, because it is a part of jazz to have these repeated phrases. We're not only playing eighth note lines all the time, and it makes sense to also have other types of melodies like this. And you will find them also in more modern jazz. You can find lots of places where Pat Metheny will use repeated pentatonic phrases. Pat Martino does this as well, and in that way it is a part of jazz. And while here Barney Kessel is of course obviously using it in a swing context, just really a basic swing riff, the same type of phrasing as in the first time around, and then turning it into a blues riff, but it is still something that is essential to have as a part of your vocabulary, and you want to work with that as well as just working on your ability to play eighth note lines. In general, I think that Barney Kessel is using the bebop phrases a little bit more in the bridge than he is in the A parts. So the riff parts are really used in the A's, and then he's working a little bit more with longer lines and basing them a little bit more on the harmony when he's playing over the bridge. In this example, this is the second half of the first bridge. We're coming in on the C major 7, and then we get a phrase that's first C major 7 arpeggio, then leading notes up to the 5th of E minor, and then we get essentially phrases that are just coming out of chord tones on the strong beats, and then small phrases that are leading to those chord tones using sometimes other chords actually. So the first part is coming out on the B, and then we get a phrase that's targeting the G, and then two notes that are targeting the E, and then targeting the C sharp, and then just the C sharp diminished triad. So here what he's doing on the E minor is really a little bit like he's playing E minor, B7, E minor, B7, and then using E minor, A7 finally. I think he's thinking a lot in terms of having the chord tones and then having small melodies that are leading notes. So not really thinking so much in scales, but much more thinking in chords and leading notes. The next part of this example is really again him just playing around with the chords a little bit, because the way the line is working here is they're just 6 intervals, and he's kind of using them to introduce other chords. So he's coming out on the D7, and he's just playing this basic 6 interval from the 3rd up to the root, then moving that down to the same, which is kind of suggesting a C major chord, and then the same, suggesting B minor, and then suggesting B flat minor, which is of course taking him back down to the A minor in the last A of this form. So in that way he's playing a melody and introducing more chords, really just with 2 notes, that is pointing back towards the last A. When he gets to the last A, he doesn't actually stick with a 6 interval, he goes into another melodic idea, but I do think that he is using more chords to get that effect out there. The reason that I can keep on publishing videos every week is that there is a community of people over on Patreon that are supporting the channel. I'm very grateful for their support, and it's because of them that I can keep on making all these jazz guitar and music theory videos. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page, and if you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. This example is again in the bridge. It's in the second chorus of the solo, and now it's the first part of the bridge, so it's the 2-5 to the 4th degree, so there's a 2-5 to C major. And we start with really a chromatic enclosure, so it's a pickup to the F. The F is not really there, or it's very ghosted the way that he's playing it. And then from there he's just running up what is essentially an F major 7 flat 5 arpeggio, which of course also is really spelling out a G7 with a 13 and a 9th. So it is more of a bebop line here, clearly. There's some chromaticism, and he's also really working with the chord changes and not so much with other aspects of music. It's really about spelling out the changes and making an interesting melody around the chord tones. But he does still leave a lot of space. So after having played this, he actually doesn't play anything until the end of the bar, adds a chord, and then we get a G7 line, which then resolves to the 9th of C major 7. On the C major, we get a line that's clearly based on a C major, actually a C triad arpeggio, but then also, again, we have this idea of using chord tones and leading notes. So first just the triad, leading note, and then a scale run down to the 5th, leading note, up to the root, and leading note to the 3rd, and then ending on the root. So in this way he's using sort of, again, the idea of not thinking in scales, but thinking in chord tones and leading notes. Very similar to what I was talking about in the video that I did on George Benson, and how he will create lines that are similarly not also just using the chord tones and then small melodies that are leading to each of the chord tones. When I was first introduced to Barney Kessel, then I actually didn't like his playing that much, and that was also probably because I was introduced to recordings of his playing that are a lot later than this. I think that if you want to check out, for me at least, the great stuff with Barney Kessel, then you have to look for the stuff that's sort of end of the 50s and maybe beginning of the 60s. Like this recording with the Pol Winners is really a great album. There's an album with Sonny Rollins called Sonny Rollins and the Contemporary Leaders, which is also really good. I think that's where you find some really great playing from Barney Kessel. Later, I think especially his technique and his timing got a little bit too rusty for my taste, at least. And of course, it's my taste. I get a lot of flack for saying stuff like that, but that's just my taste. You may, for instance, also not think that Pat Metheny can play jazz. That's okay, it's your taste. I don't agree with you, but that's how it is. And I have that with Barney Kessel as well, obviously. But if you check out this period, then I think you can find some really great things, and there's a lot of stuff you can learn from it. And you can really hear how he manages to make this really great mix of swing and bebop. And you have to keep in mind with his technique, obviously, that the man is, I think, almost only playing downstrokes. So of course there are some limitations to that, and that's also what's causing some stuff in terms of notes becoming unclear and sweeps that are almost only ghost notes. If you want to check out another guitar player that's also really good at mixing swing ideas with bebop ideas and also use a lot of blues, then check out one of these videos on Kenny Burrell. If this is the first time you see one of my videos and you want to learn more about jazz guitar, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. That's about it for this time. Thank you for watching, and until next time.